Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is still December 14th here in suburban Chicago. I am still out for my walk, recording the second half of the same episode about instincts we have in games, things that don't work the way we expect them to, and how that interrupts our ability to easily learn games. We've already talked about Wingspan and the Martin Wallace deck builders, but I wanted to talk about a couple more of these games as we move in. Now I wanted to start with another anecdote. Last time I started with an anecdote about a thread on Board Game Geek in which someone was arguing about whether 0 is less than 1. So there was another thread that I was reading that was actually not as pleasant, just because there wasn't really anything to debate. The user was just wrong. But it was interesting to see how it emerged anyway. And that was a conversation from a new player trying to figure out how Arkham Horror worked. So if you haven't played Arkham Horror, the card game, and I'm talking about the card game here, just for heads up, I'll try to always remember that it's mentioned that it's Arkham Horror, the card game. I'll never basically talk about Arkham Horror, the board game, because I haven't played it in a decade, or not quite a decade. I haven't played it in a long time, and it's not a favorite of mine. But anyway, in Arkham Horror, the card game, the enemies are kind of interesting. You only interact with the enemies on your turn. That in the game, at the beginning of a round, you're going to draw cards that make bad things happen. That's the mythos phase of every Arkham game. And then you are going to play cards to do actions. Well, sometimes when you're drawing those cards to make bad things happen, you'll spawn monsters, or enemies of some sort, which are placed in the card tableau, often in your engaged area. So these are enemies that are messing with you. Then on your turn, you have to interact with these enemies. And the game has rules. Basically, it says if an enemy is harrying you, you have a couple particular things that you can do. You can fight them, you can evade them, you can parley with them. Those might be the three. Parley means talk to them. There are some enemies that are like humans, and they have a parley skill that you can talk with them about. And then, of course, fight is a pretty self-evident action that you could do. And then evade, I think that's pretty self-evident as well, right? It means dodge. There are also a number of actions in the game that are called fast, which means you can do them without doing something else. If you want to do anything else, like, say, get out a weapon, then that provokes an attack of opportunity. The enemy gets to attack you on your turn. Normally, the enemy does not get to attack you on your turn. Since if you haven't played it, if you use evade, you exhaust the enemy, and then you can do other stuff on your turn. So evade kind of, you get away from them, and then you can equip a weapon or, do whatever, because that turn they're kind of deactivated. Then after your turn and the turn of all the other players is over, then there's the enemy phase, and all enemies who have not been exhausted get to attack. Now this is the part that is counterintuitive. That actually made me think of the counterintuitive element of this episode, which is in Arkham Horror, the enemies attacking you is not a test of any kind. Now when you want to do something, if you want to investigate, you want to attack an enemy, you want to do anything, you have a test. You come up with a skill number. You play a certain number of icons, and your character has a certain skill in, let's say, fighting. Strength, I think, is the name of the skill. And then you draw a token out of a bag that modifies that score, up or down, 1, 2, 3, or sometimes more. Or 0, or there's a couple symbol tokens. But you have this randomized result that you can try to ameliorate by playing enough cards or using enough stuff to make your score higher. Right? And you're always kind of balancing how much do I want to risk the losing. You always could lose. There is a token in it. It's the auto fail that you will never pass a test if you draw that token. But for the most part, that's not really But when the enemies attack you, there is no test. You don't, like in D&D, when an enemy attacks you, they have to roll to attack you, and then your armor protects you on some level. Sometimes you can get a saving throw against poison or something. Many games have an exchange where you attack an enemy, they roll defense. Then when they attack you, you roll defense. In Arkham Horror, it's not that way. If you do things, including attack an enemy, you're just making a test against their skill level. when they attack you, they just do damage to you. There's no test. So it was a very long explanation of something that to get you to the spot we're at here, which is this idea of your instinct about how a game would work. Someone posted a thread in the Arkham Horror forum on BoardGameGeek in which they wrote for quite a while about how they could not figure out how to do the tests for when the enemies attack you, because they hadn't really figured out that the enemies don't do tests. So it was interesting to see the way that the conversation in the forums went back and forth, explaining to this person, yeah, you don't do tests when the enemies attack you. Boom, done. So that part was part of what got me thinking about our instincts and kind of our history, bringing our gameplay into the game, that this is something we all do, which I started talking about last episode, but I wanted to give you another origin story. You know, a second version of that I encountered came from another discussion I was having. I think it was about Arkham Horror, and the person was bringing with them, it wasn't Arkham Horror, what game was it? I was writing about a game, or reading about a game, and the person brought with them assumptions from Magic. They were assuming something would work exactly like it does in Magic. I think I was reading a rule book that someone had written for a game, and a bunch of the rules in their rule book assumed that players understood Magic, the game Magic the Gathering, and assumed that players would assume the game worked exactly like things do in Magic. It was a really interesting set of assumptions that got me to think about how we bring rule sets into play, whether or not we understand that what they're for or where they come from. Because this person really just was assuming that everybody understood Magic, and anyone who's playing this game understands Magic and would want to use Magic rules. And as a result, you know, the game directions were not functional at all. They assumed that you knew how to play Magic and wanted to use those rules. So again, bringing assumptions into the game. So that got me thinking back into the subject of today about Arkham Horror, and were there other places where I had made mistakes like the ones that the other person did. One of the big mistakes I made actually comes from Netrunner. So in Netrunner, which is a game I played for a long time and still would like to go back to at some point soon, there is a kind of rule that if you want to do something, you have to be able to do it fully. So if it says pay 5 coins, or pay 5 credits, then do a thing, you can't do it if you can't pay 5 credits. You're just not allowed to do that at all. If it's a penalty of some sort, and it says something like pay 5 credits or take 1 net damage, and you only have 3 credits, you can't pay 3 credits. You can't choose to pay 5 credits and then not complete that. If you're not able to complete that, you have to do the other thing. Ever since I've played Arkham Horror, I assumed Arkham Horror worked the same way. In particular, because of the Grimm rule, which suggests that if you're in doubt about a rule, choose the worst interpretation. The worst interpretation is the correct one until you know for sure. I assumed that in Arkham Horror, if you get a choice between 2 consequences, and you can't fulfill one of the consequences, that you have to choose the other. So like if it says discard 2 cards or take 2 mental damage, I would think you'd have to take 2 mental damage if you don't have 2 cards to discard. Well, in a conversation about this with other people, I discovered the exact opposite is true. That in Arkham Horror, if you have to do a thing and you can only, so there's 2 parts of it. If you have to do a thing, if it tells you to do a thing and you can't do it fully, you do it as much as you can, which is also true of Netrunner. You know, if it says lose 10 credits and you only have 7, you lose 7. But then the other half is not true, and not the same as Netrunner. If you have to make a choice, and the choice involves doing a thing that you can't do completely, you're still allowed to choose the side that you can't do completely, rather than the side that you can. That blew my mind. Now, I don't know that there's any particular in-world reason for that. That's just the rule that exists. But this is one of those places where my assumptions about how a game should work really changed my experience of that game, because I've been playing it wrong. The last personal example I wanted to offer of where I assumed a game would work one way and it doesn't was in Everdell. So last time my wife and I played Everdell with the Pearlbrook expansion, which has been quite fun, we encountered a card. It said, as the best I can remember it, reveal 3 cards, build 1, discard the other, build 1 for free, discard the other 2. Maybe it was reveal 3 cards, build one costing 3 or if any cost 3 or less, build one of those for free, discard the other 2. Okay, so I had this card in my hand that cost 3. It was a difficult thing to build, or that was worth 3, I guess, worth 3 points. It cost 3. It cost a bunch of resources that I didn't have. So I built my whole turn, like 2 or 3 actions on a couple turns. I built a big part of what I was doing for the next several rounds around the idea of being able to play this card and then reveal 3 cards out of my hand and then discard the 1. Now, I believe that because I've played other games where reveal meant show cards from your hand. And man, I spent a fair amount of time really trying to figure out what game I was thinking of that had me do that, and I could not remember it. But I know that I've played at least 1, maybe 2 or 3 games where reveal means show a card out of your hand. Or if you're supposed to show a card off the deck, it'll say reveal from the deck or draw from the deck and reveal. But this card just said reveal. Now, upon looking up the rules, I realized I was wrong because my wife had done it properly. I hadn't even thought about it or noticed it, but maybe 20 minutes before I played my card, she played another copy of that same card, and she did it properly, which is draw 3 cards from the deck and reveal them. If any of them cost 3 or less, choose one of the ones that cost 3 or less and construct it for free, discard the other 2. That is the proper way to play that card. And honestly, looking at the iconography, that is what the iconography said too. But for some reason in my head, because the word reveal in many games means show from your hand, I just assumed it meant show from your hand. And I had been planning on showing a card out of my hand as a way, and then moving on from there, revealing cards out of my hand. But in fact, that isn't what we were doing. We're not revealing cards out of my hand. It's supposed to be revealing cards from the deck. And frankly, it wrecked my game. I had a whole bunch of sort of plans around having that card then that I didn't. And by the time I had done it, I had kind of committed to the plan of action. It was totally my fault. But again, this is a mistake that I brought in my thinking into the game. So this is a thing that happens. I've heard people talk about it. Quackalope did an episode of the Quackalope channel video cast lately that was like the top 5 mistakes experienced gamers make. And one of them is assuming you know the rules. Experienced gamers who've played a lot of games, played a game a couple times, they think they know the rules, and so they don't look them over. And often they end up remembering things wrong or mixing up rules from other games. I think the more games I play and the older I get, the more that happens to me. So I really need to be diligent about looking back at rules, frankly trusting my wife, who has better memory of this sort of thing than I do. That leads me to my final game that I was thinking about, which is there are games that play on our assumptions about what happens in rules. And I was trying to think about, I'm going to have to talk about this in the vaguest of terms because I don't want to ruin anything. But I think the place where this happens most is the 2 sets of games, Unlock and Escape, or Exit. Now, Unlock, there are probably 15 to 20 published Unlock adventures. I think there are that many, again, Exit games, maybe not quite that many, but quite a few. And both of these games are escape room games. So they are games where you have this puzzle and a little narrative that you're trapped somewhere, or you're doing a thing, and then as you solve puzzles, you get more cards. They're almost always card driven, although Exit, it's card driven and then you get a little booklet. In Unlock, it's just card driven and then they have an app. In both cases, using the cards and the other elements, you get to try to solve puzzles. And many of these puzzles are lateral thinking puzzles. They're designed to have you think in an unexpected direction in order to solve the puzzle, to do a thing that you hadn't been planning on doing, to look at a thing in a new way. And honestly, the more of these you do, the easier they get because you come to see what it is that the kinds of things that they're trying to do. You also come to recognize patterns. So like when you see that there are 4 different colors of a thing, and then you see that 4 different colors appearing somewhere else, that's a good bet that you're going to be using those 4 colors from the first thing to solve the second thing, or vice versa. So a lot of these games build on your experiences in the past, or build on the expectations that you've played some of these games before. But they also will trick you by using that same set of misleading qualities, by doing a thing that you hadn't expected them to do. And when you figure that out, it either feels really cool or really annoying, maybe depending how easily you figured it out or how difficult you found the leap of logic that led you to the thing you figured out. which again goes to a kind of bringing an informed experience to a game. When you have a set of experiences that matches the ones the game designers are expecting you to have, it's more likely that you're going to find pleasure and resonance with what they're doing in the game. Whereas if you haven't had those same experiences the game designers expect, then often the things you're bringing to the game are so different that you're just not going to get the same experience out of it. So there's 2 episodes worth of deliberating on this somewhat nonsensical and rambling topic. I think it's interesting to think about how some games will build on or refute our expectations, how we often can set ourselves up for confusion or failure by bringing those expectations from one game to another when it's not justified to do so, and how a good game designer can work from and work against those expectations to make the game experience more fun. Now, in some ways, this is a meditation on the same subject that we talked about in the 180-degree rule episodes, but I feel like I've approached it in a slightly different direction, so hopefully these 2 episodes were worth your time and interesting. If they were, or if they weren't, the best way to let me know that is to go over and join the conversation on Board Game Geek Guild in Guild 3269, where I like to talk about things with people who listen to the show. We also there have a monthly update for the things that we're playing, so you should go there and let us know what you're playing and what you're planning to play next month, as well as, since it's December, how you've done on your end of the year goals or the end of the year kinds of games that you like to play. You can also reach out to me individually. I'm Wombat929 over on Board Game Geek if you want to send me an individual message, or you can email me, Brendan@Rattlebox Games. I look forward to hearing from you in any of those venues and hope that we can play a game. I also play a number of games on Boîte à Jeux, Board Game Arena, and Yucata.de. In all 3 of those places, my username is also Wombat929. So feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to play a game there. Well, this brings me to the end of the episode, so I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Thanks for joining me. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.